MVP.
One in the air, left center field, back it goes, Harper, the swing of his life!
He never get ahead of himself. As
I know Rennies do every day. It's always been that way for me. Always been a get better mentality every day, grow every day, be a better leader every day, be a better quarterback every day. And when that wrench do, I don't plan on missing no payments. So,
welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to 3 in the Keystone, episode 126. I'm Adam Seltzer alongside Al Ryan, a cranky Al Ryan who just watched his Penn State Nittany Lions drop their first Big Ten loss to Rutgers at the rack.
Yeah, you're not going to win them all. And listen, I'm used to heartbreak when it comes to Penn State hoops, so I'll take my lump, Seltzer.
And Philly sports.
Yeah.
Not in the building tonight, Mr. Chris Guest, who told us the story last week, Al, about how his daughter shit in the tub. Well, apparently that was a sign of things to come, as the stomach bug has entered the guest household and has taken them all by storm.
Yeah, he has the audacity to be confused about how they all got a stomach bug after his daughter's shit in the tub and they didn't clean it properly with bleach. I don't understand. What's the confusion here, guest?
Yeah, if there was any answer to was there any unknown answer to the question we asked last week, it is you need to bleach the tub.
Yeah. So in his absence, I brought on a friend of mine who is probably the exact opposite of Guest, honestly, aesthetically at least, because Guest is what, a 5'5" black guy. And we brought on, how tall would you say you are, Marco? Mr. Marco Smith is with us. 6'1"?
6'6", my friend. 6'6".
So we have the tower himself, the leaning tower, Marco Smith. And I wanted to introduce Marco by telling a story. I wanted you to be the third party, the non-biased opinion on, you can tell us what's right and wrong here. So a few years back, Marco and I were playing Bago, or you might call it cornhole, on the beach. And we were playing against two friends of ours, listeners of the show, Chris Pfeiffer and John Schwartz. And the tide started to come in at a rapid pace. And so I think you know where I'm going with this. The water was getting closer and closer to the Bago set, to the point where it was, impending doom, and we had to move the game. Marco, without announcing it, without saying anything, and I was on his team, in the middle of the round, picks up his board on his side and just starts walking it away from the water. Now, you tell us, Adam, violation or not?
Well, the bags can't get waterlogged at that point, right? Is the water up in there at that point, or
the water is good? It's close, right, Marco? You can tell your side of the story here.
It's inevitable. So if the water hits it, the game's ruined. It's done. The rest of your afternoon goes nowhere. So it's a little bit of salvation for everybody that I just took one for the team, and I was not rewarded with appreciation, but instead a whole lot of complaining.
Are there bags on the board?
Yeah, it's mid-round. Like there's like 2 bags each to throw. I think a bag might have been in midair.
Yeah, I think you got to risk it and leave it there for the round to be finished. If there's bags on the board, no bags on the board, like the first 3 guys have missed, I think you can pick the board up.
Oh, I know I didn't miss. There might have been bags in the hole.
Even if there's bags in the hole, that's fine because they're not on the board at that point. Yeah, I got to say it's a violation. Small one, though. I don't think it's one that you need to quibble over years later, though, Al.
Oh, well, listen.
But I know Penn State lost. You want to get it all out. Like, it's okay.
Well, we could put a pin in that one then, Marco, huh?
We can, but at least we've got a third-party opinion now.
There we go.
So we have some comments in the chat. Andy Rice.
Yeah, Marco, we got Cerise in the chat.
Cerise.
Oh, my goodness. Is he allowed in here?
We'll see how long before we ban him. We'll give him a few minutes.
So I did announce on the soft opening, for those of you guys in the chat who have joined the chat in the past, this will be our last night going live as StreamYard has jacked the rates of their product, and we are at the renewal mark, and we decided to forego it. So the podcast will continue on the audio version, but get your last licks in tonight in the chat because this is the end of it.
Yeah, closing out with a bang.
Yeah. Or dump if you're a guest. But listen, we have a lot to talk about tonight, so let's get into it. Seemed to be a game where the Eagles, they beat the Panthers 22-16. Not a lot to talk about, we said on Sunday, but we were wrong, Al. The Eagles drama, it has come to light again. A.J. Brown expresses unhappiness in the locker room, mentioning that what was the issue? It's been the passing, pretty blunt and clear. And then Brandon Graham goes on and adds fuel to the fire last night by saying that these two used to be friends. They need to differentiate their business and their personal life. I guess the question is, who's right, who's wrong, and why now? Al?
Can we all start with one word, like who's right, who's wrong? Because in my opinion, AJ's wrong here. The way
Brandon's wrong.
Yeah, well, he's more wrong, but none of this happens without AJ.
I didn't really have a qualm with what AJ said. I thought he answered the question. The question was, what's wrong? He said the passing. I don't think it's anything anybody hasn't known. The passing game hasn't been sharp. Is it necessary to say it? Probably not, but I don't think it was that bad of a comment, to be honest with you.
I just think he has to have more awareness. He knows what he's doing. He's planting the seeds. I think AJ Brown is. I listen. He's the man. He's my son's favorite player. He signed an autograph for my son, so I'm indebted to that man. But he's immature, man. He's got a little bit of maturing to do. He knows what's going to happen when he says that comment, and he got the attention that he wanted from the national media, from teammates past and present, Eagles past and present. He set a fire now that you can't go back and set. It's like when you leave that ember burning, and all of a sudden the next thing you know, half of the New Jersey forest is burning down. I think he was wrong for doing it the way he did it. If he has an issue, handle it behind closed doors. That's where I stand.
Marco?
Yeah, it's a little bit of, if you live in a glass house, you can't throw stones. So you better be blocking on every play. You're not getting the ball. You better be finishing your routes. I mean, they better be able to not look at you for anything wrong, because as Al said, you're planting that seed and you're kind of passing the buck from a responsibility standpoint. So that's the kind of stuff that good teams, successful franchises don't do. You say, all right, we've got a 9-game winning streak. At the end of the day, we didn't play perfect and we've got some things to work on, but we're a team. And he knows what he's doing. He's smart enough to figure that out. This is what diva wide receivers do. And, he's not on the level of a TO, but it's certainly not a good start.
Yeah, we lived through the era growing up of the diva wide receivers, the TOs, the Randy Mosses, the Chad Johnsons, the big mouth wide receivers. And it's kind of going away. And AJ has brought that back. But if you've seen on Twitter now the tape of that game and how many times AJ Brown was open and not getting the football, and the frustration builds when that, because it's not been just this week. It's been a few weeks in a row where the passing game hasn't gotten on point. And I think the frustration boiled over. If Brandon Graham doesn't make his comments last night, I think this is old news by Wednesday, and I think it's all forgotten at that point.
I think that the difference is, the reason why he has to keep his mouth shut is there's a 234-pound difference in the locker room this year versus last year. You can complain about it last year because the team was obviously winning games that they had no business winning, and they were spiraling out of control. But this year you have Saquon Barkley, man. You can't be upset. I get it. 6.6 targets per game is low for a guy who is a top 5 wide receiver in the league. I get that. But you have to look at it from the larger point of view. You have to look at the macro, not the micro. If you're A.J. Brown, you have a quarterback who you're trying to dial back, because this guy obviously has shown that he can't be the leader of a team. He has to be, as we've said, the game manager that doesn't screw it up. And we know that his lows are so low that he can lose games against an Atlanta and against the Tampa Bay. So if you're A.J. Brown, you have to take this in stride, man. You just won 9 straight games, most of which in dominating fashion. And Adam, you called it last week. This was a sleepwalk game, man. They've just played 2 really hard games back-to-back, and they're looking at another one with Pittsburgh this weekend. This was a game where they could walk through it a little bit. Jalen missed him. He missed him wide open a number of times. But, man, come on. Just take the win. Nobody got hurt. Move on to the next week.
Yeah, I just think it's receivers have never been one to keep their mouth shut. And he looks at guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and there's some other receivers that are having really big years that I'm drawing a blank on top of my head right now. And those guys want the ball. They want the ball, and they're not getting the ball right now. Can we get into a little bit of Jalen and what's wrong with Jalen, especially this week, and how concerned we need to be about what's going on there?
Yeah. Sure.
I'll say,
I think I know what I would do to fix him. I want to know what you guys would do.
so I think here's the issue. I think, and Al, this may be you may be able to give a better example being a teacher. You know, when you ask a kid to do something, whether it's even if it's a young kid, a toddler, and you say you need to say please after you ask for something, and then all of a sudden every time they say a sentence they say please. It's almost like they're rubbing it in your face that you're asking them to do something. I think they had a conversation with Jalen Hurts, and they were like, you need to not turn the ball over. And now it's gotten to the point where this guy's so gun shy about making any sort of throw in traffic because he doesn't want to turn the ball over that he's just taking all the dump outs and all the safe routes. And if he has to throw it away, he'll throw it away because he doesn't want to turn the ball over at all. That's my thought process on where we are now, because there's really no other excuse. There's pictures of him staring down wide open receivers and not throwing the football.
I think it's more he has the yips, which is something you can relate more to than I can.
The yips.
No, but in all seriousness, I do think he's now second guessing himself. I mean, if you want to talk about the teacher aspect, I would actually think of it more like when I teach Jackson how to play sports. When I take him outside out back and I tell him how to shoot a jump shot, I can see him in the game thinking about it. And I'm like, shit, I screwed him up because now we're talking about too much about mechanics. And instead of him just letting it fly, he's thinking about, oh, do I have the ball in the right position in my hand? Am I releasing it with my elbow high? Am I releasing, my one hand going through? Like, I can see him thinking about that. And that's what I see Jalen Hurts doing on the field. He's so concerned about turning the ball over and making the huge mistake that he's okay with making the smaller mistake of maybe pulling it down and running when he shouldn't, taking a sack when he shouldn't, checking down to somebody in the flat when he shouldn't, when he has a streaking A.J. Brown going across the middle for what would be an easy 20, 30, maybe 40-yard completion. I don't know. Marco, what do you say?
Well, that's not necessarily the type of thing that's going to get fixed week to week either. I mean, that's an off-season project, and kind of if you need to rebuild his mechanics a little bit, rebuild his confidence. I think the broader issue with him is that he's probably somewhat plateaued. I mean, he's a B-plus quarterback. Like, he's good enough to win a Super Bowl with you, but he's not going to ever kind of have the field vision of a Joe Burrow or probably the instincts of a Tom Brady, and that's fine. But at the same time, you have to supplement around him with the right guys, and you're not going to fix him week by week before you get in the playoffs. I think you just need to tailor the offense a little bit, and it probably is continuing to be run heavy and hit a few deep shots. But that's where the A.J. Browns of the world need to realize that this is not like a gunslinging offense. This can be a run-heavy offense, hit a couple deep plays. But agree, Jalen has to take those shots, and sometimes it'll be to Smith, sometimes to Brown, and it's a confidence thing, and that's why I'm probably a little more pessimistic about the Birds' chances than you guys probably are.
So let me ask you this, Marco. You said that you think Jalen Hurts is a Super Bowl quarterback capable of winning a Super Bowl.
I do.
Let's say they win the Super Bowl this year. Does he go down in more of the likes of a Brad Johnson, a Trent Dilfer, of quarterbacks who have won Super Bowls, or is he truly a quarterback capable of winning a Super Bowl, if that makes sense, that question?
It does, Adam. It probably the former, but the good news is he's got more than a decade to add to that tally, I'd say. I mean, 2022, they were 3 points away, and if it weren't for a potential ticky-tack pass interference on the goal line, they might have had a chance for it. So his story's still being written, and the only good thing I'd say about him is when they've talked to his old teammates at Bama, et cetera, they say he gets a little bit better each offseason, and he works on one facet of his game and improves it. So he's not the most talented guy. He's not going to have the biggest arm in the league or the best accuracy, but they said little by little he works at it. And to a certain extent, that's kind of all you can ask for. Is he going to put in the time and effort? If not, he'll end up as the Brad Johnson best case, and best case Brad Johnson, worst case, he's just the guy who never got it done because he couldn't put it all together.
I think it's hard to answer that question, though, because the variance with Jalen Hurts is so high. We've seen the high highs and we've seen the low lows. So we don't know. Like, if they win the Super Bowl, are we getting a Super Bowl win with 2022 Jalen Hurts showing up, or a Super Bowl win with 2023 Jalen Hurts showing up? Right?
Well, 2023, 2024, 2021.
Right.
All the same.
That has a lot to do with the answer to that question. But what I would do, and I don't disagree with you, Marco, when you said that it's not something that's necessarily going to get fixed on a week-by-week basis this year. But the urgency, I think, is high because you clearly have a roster that can win the Super Bowl this season. So over the next, what do they have? 4 games left, right? Over the next 4 games, you have to let him throw. And you have to have him throwing balls to A.J. Brown over the middle, throwing deep posts, throwing flags, throwing fly routes. You have to have him throwing 30-plus times a game because you need him to get that confidence back. I'm sorry. Even against Pittsburgh this week, I think you have to get him back into the groove of, hey, I need to rebuild this rapport with A.J. Brown, with Devontae Smith on the field, and even with the Grant Calcaterra, with Goddard being out for, an extended period of time now. I think you have to build those relationships back.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Al, because, again, as we get to the playoffs, you're going to be playing better teams, better defenses, and the pictures on tape this week show this guy has no confidence, and teams are going to start to stack the box. The fear of having A.J. Brown in single coverage and Devontae Smith in single coverage is going to be like, well, we're going to have to see him prove that he can beat us that way because we know Saquon can. And as teams just gear up against the run, you're going to see, that you're right. Jalen's going to have to play better than he has the past 6, 7, 8 weeks.
Question, though, for you guys is if they do that over these next few weeks and he struggles big time, is that worse than having him not do it at all? Sounds like you would say yes, because he should at least get it out there. But if he throws 3 picks and they lose by 14 this weekend, doesn't that really set his development back?
I think you're right. And that's the low of lows, right? That's the risk that you're taking if you're going to push all your chips in on Jalen Hurts leading this team, being the focal point of the offense for the next 4 weeks. I have faith in him enough with the way the schedule finishes out this season. He's shown, and the Eagles have shown, that they like to beat the shit out of the bad teams. And they have some bad teams on the horizon after that Pittsburgh game. So I have enough faith in him that the bottom won't fall out completely. And guess what? If it does, then Adam's right. Teams were going to beat us in the playoffs anyway because they're going to put 8 in the box in the playoffs, and they're going to dare Jalen Hurts to beat us. So if it's going to happen, it's going to happen one way or the other.
So to your point, Marco, maybe it's not this week. Maybe it's Washington, Dallas, the Giants, where you say, let's open this thing up. And Al, to your point, if he can't do it against those teams, he's not going to be able to do it against Detroit. He's not going to be able to do it against a Minnesota, a Green Bay, or whoever they're seeing in the playoffs. Just one thing before we kind of wrap and go into some of the other topics this week. I found this interesting. It was tweeted, a scouting report of him coming into the NFL draft, and it had his strengths and his weaknesses. And I just pulled the weaknesses, and I want you guys to kind of just be honest of whether or not you think any of this stuff has improved. Has issues sustaining rhythm as a passer with so many off-scheduled throws, inconsistent patience allowing routes to develop, slow recognition of early throw opportunities, leaves slants and crossers behind targets, misses checkdowns and opts for harder throws, deep arm dip into elongated release, forced speedsters at Oklahoma and Alabama to slow down for deep throws, need to get better at trusting his pocket, quick to drop his eyes when pressure mounts, more likely to void the pocket than climb, scan, and throw from it. Pretty nail on the head of what we have now.
Who wrote this, and do they have the Powerball numbers for next week? That's what I want to know.
Right.
That's spot on.
Right. And I don't think a lot of it has improved since he's been here. A little bit, but as far as some of the accuracy across the middle, but a lot of those issues, especially the stuff in the pocket, still has those issues there.
Sounded a lot like a McNabb scouting report as well, I was thinking.
Yeah.
Donovan was better than him, though. All right, so let's get some predictions for this week and whether or not it gets turned around. Marco, you're the guest. What do you got this weekend against Pittsburgh?
I'd say a close game, ground heavy. I agree with Al. They probably should open it up in some point and see what they've got, but I'd say something along the lines of a 2017 Eagles win.
Al?
What I really like about this game, this situation, is the Steelers just put up 44 and 27 points in the last 2 weeks. Their offense has just gone crazy. I don't think that's sustainable for Russell Wilson and the Steelers. I think they're going to come back down to earth a little bit against this Eagles defense, because let's not forget how spectacular this defense is. I think the Eagles win something pretty close. I'm going to say maybe like a 24-20 game.
You guys both in the same ballpark. I'm taking the Birds as well this weekend. I think they'll open it up. I think they'll get AJ involved. I think AJ goes for 100, kind of shushes the critics, at least for this week. I'm going to take the Eagles by 10 points. I'll go Eagles 24-14. I think Pittsburgh's offense comes down to life. I don't think Pickens will play for Pittsburgh either. So I think give me the Birds this week by 10.
Yeah, Cerise has given us the scouting report in the chat. Throw on Pitt, open them up. A.J. Brown's a stud. You know what happens, too? Every time A.J. Brown opens his mouth, they feed him. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, so I expect to see that again. Before we leave on the Eagles real quick, though, can I get your guys' opinion? How much of this do you still put on Nick Sirianni, though? Number one, letting Jalen get to this point and the relationship fracturing between him and A.J. to get to this point.
I think it's more on Jalen than it is anything else. I can't make Sirianni the scapegoat. Jalen Hurts was brought in to be the leader of the football team, and if he can't manufacture a relationship with his number one receiver, there's something wrong there with him or AJ. But I think it's Jalen, man. I think he rubs people the wrong way.
I'd agree with that as well, but I think some of it has to go on Sirianni because if you respect your coach enough, you don't do some of this stuff. I mean, how many times did you hear this happening in the Belichick regime? Or when you look at Mike Tomlin and, you know, he's had to deal with Antonio Brown and Pickens and these guys, and he kept the lid on Antonio Brown for quite a while, even though he and Roethlisberger were going at it. So I think there's a level of respect that you show when you kind of fear/love your head coach, and that's there with Belichick. It's there with Tomlin. I don't know if anybody feels that strongly about Sirianni to say, I don't want to disrespect Nick. They just kind of put it out there because at the end of the day, they're the multimillionaires and they've got a little bit more leverage than he does.
Fair point.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's a little Sirianni because what worries me is that of the 4 Super Bowl contending teams right now, if you take a look at Kansas City, Buffalo, Detroit, and Philly, we're the only ones with these locker room issues, man. Like you're telling me a guy like an Amon-Ra St. Brown can't be complaining at some point here and there? I mean, he's not getting many more targets per game than A.J. Brown. He's getting 7.5 to A.J.'s 6.6. You're telling me Gibbs or Montgomery, one of them two, can't complain that they're splitting carries up in Detroit? You're telling me somebody out in Kansas City and Xavier Worthy or somebody can't be complaining? I mean, I just see all over the league like there can be these little things here and there, but we seem to be the only team that it keeps happening with.
Yeah, no, good points. So we'll see what happens this week and whether or not we can kind of bury this or it's going to be an issue the rest of the way. All right, let's get to the college football playoff because I think we're going to have some nice heated debates here. The bracket comes out after the games this past weekend. Here are your 12 teams that are in order. Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, Arizona State. They will get byes. Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Tennessee, Indiana, SMU, and Clemson. That is the order. There was some heated texting going on this weekend while I was on the golf course, Al. By the way, I did not 3-putt that hole that you were pissed about. You told me you wish I did. Where do you want to start, Al? Because we can go a million different directions with this. I know you and Chris were getting into who should get in. I'm completely okay with who got in. I'm disappointed in the order of the teams.
Guest ducked me this week. I mean, he knows he's in the wrong. Well, can we start with Penn State and Penn State seeding? Because that's the biggest thing I've heard from people. People have been whining about Penn State. They don't deserve the 6. They don't deserve to be over Ohio State. They don't deserve to be over Notre Dame. And I don't understand that. I don't understand how you can say that.
Well, make your case. I'm one of those people.
You cannot penalize a team for losing the conference championship game. It's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. These are extra games that these teams get told that they have to play that honestly, in the landscape of today's college football environment, don't mean anything. They're like how the Rose Bowl now is just like the name of a semifinal game. These games have no prestige. It doesn't matter if you were the, quote, Big Ten champion of the year if you didn't win it all. So to get put in this game, potentially lose the game, and then be penalized for it is ridiculous. And if it happened to an SEC team where an SEC team got put in the game like in Alabama and they lost and then got knocked out of the playoffs for it, you could forget about Alabama ever going into that game ever again and risking their spot.
So you want to be rewarded if you win, but not penalized if you lose.
I can't help the way the system is. You're forced into that game. I don't know the answer to that, Adam. I really don't. But I don't think I don't think SMU should be penalized for it either because SMU loses to Clemson, right? In an extra game that no other team in their conference has to play. But if SMU does not make that game and they don't play that game, they're a one-loss team and there's no longer an argument over whether or not they should get in over Alabama.
If SMU had lost by 30, they'd be out. The committee essentially said as much, that they had a really strong showing against Clemson, lost on a last-second field goal, showed a lot of heart in the fourth quarter. So I agree with you to an extent that the games are somewhat meaningless nowadays, but there is something to be said to putting up a good fight against a legacy Clemson-type team, even though SMU was the higher-ranked team.
I did say that if there was a lopsided victory, if Penn State got the doors blown off them by 30, I did say by all means they should be dropped. But in a one-score game, a close game, which both of those games were, SMU that was overtime, wasn't it? You can't drop these teams.
Yeah, I have no problem with SMU getting in. No problem at all. So, all right, let me make this case for you, Al. Let's take Ohio State out of the picture. Penn State has 3 wins this year with teams over 500, right? They beat Bowling Green, who finished the year 7-5. They beat them by a touchdown at home. They beat Illinois, who finished 9-3 by 2 touchdowns at home. And they won at Minnesota, who finished 7-5. They beat them by a point. Those were the only 3 victories Penn State had all year over teams over 500. Take the second loss out of the equation, the championship game. What differentiates them from what Indiana did? And why are they 4 slots ahead of Indiana, who also had 1 loss, lost to the same team, and pretty much played the same exact schedule? Why are they 4 slots lower than Penn State?
Indiana's strength of schedule was 37 behind us. We were 30th in the nation. They were 67th. We still had wins. We still have wins on the road at USC and Wisconsin, which I get that USC and Wisconsin had down years this year, but
Wisconsin's 5-7.
They're still typically going to be good wins.
It doesn't matter, though.
But look at Ohio State's schedule. Who did Ohio State beat?
Ohio State beat 2 teams in the playoff. They beat Penn State at Penn State, and Penn State didn't score a touchdown in that game offensively. And they beat Indiana.
Look at Ohio State's non-conference schedule. They chose
your non-conference schedule.
They chose to play Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. We at least went to West Virginia.
Okay, you played Bowling Green, so you've played nobody else. There were 4 good teams in the Big Ten this year. 4.
Right.
And Ohio State played all of them. And if it wasn't for a championship game, you would have played one of them and you lost.
But you know this. You're a victim to the schedule. What can you do? And that's to me, that's why I hate that Guest isn't here, because he's the king of that. He loves saying you can only play the team in front of you, so you can't penalize the team for beating those teams. He said it all last season when the Eagles were 10-1 and they were just beating up on shitty teams. So all of a sudden he wants to flip that script. There's 120 plus teams in college football. You can't play every team.
Okay, well, we have 2 teams here that are pretty much even, and one team went into the other team's building and beat them. That needs to be weighed into the equation.
And if you take my argument into account, which is you should not penalize a team for losing in the conference championship game, Penn State has 1 loss this season, and it's to Ohio State. Ohio State has 2 losses, and it's to a ranked Oregon at Oregon, and it's to Michigan at home, dude. And losing to a 6-win Michigan team at home should drop you.
So Ohio State lost to Oregon by a point. It's either 1 or 2. Penn State lost by 8. They're a 3.5 point
at a neutral site.
Yes, they're a 3.5 point underdog. They lost by 8. We all should have bet our life savings on the -3.5. But some of that is James Franklin PTSD. Like, he's got to win a game at some point that he's not supposed to. So yes, he probably shouldn't be penalized for having to play the extra game. But this is not like they were, a 12-point underdog and just barely lost at the end. I mean, they were losing the entire game. They were down 18 points most of the game. They made it closer at the end. Yes, they had a drive to tie it, but at some point, right, you got to win a big game. And it's really hard when you don't ever do that for people to have taking you seriously, which is, I think, why they're getting flack now. Because objectively, the resume is not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. But when you're the team that loses to Ohio State every single year and you can't get over the hump, at some point there's going to be some annoyance.
And here's the hardest part about it is the 6th seed is now the spot to be because you're set up perfectly. And I think the first adjustment that needs to be made in this playoff, and it needs to be made as soon as next year, is, okay, I'm fine with the 4 highest ranked power conference teams getting in, and they should all get a home game. They shouldn't get buys. They should be ranked accordingly. If they have to play a first-round game, they have to play a first-round game. And I think it would be cool if you had a team like Tennessee have to go to Boise State and play on the blue turf.
I do. I agree with that. I just want to you can't, like, everybody's been saying, oh, Penn State got the easy ride. Like, it's not their fault that things shook out the way they did in the bracket. If Penn State wins that game against Oregon, they most likely get the 1 seed, right? Now, all of a sudden, everybody's saying the 8th seed is the great seed to be in. because you get to play Penn State potentially, or they might say that the 7 seed is because you get to play maybe Boise. Like the script would flip if Penn State won. The last thing I'm going to say is, Adam, you can't. The playoff seeds are not determined by a single game. So to say that Ohio State should be seeded above Penn State is wrong because it's judged by an entire body of work. And if you went by a single game, Bama and Ole Miss both beat Georgia. So then all of a sudden you're saying that Bama and Ole Miss belong over Georgia.
No, I'm not, because Bama has 2 really bad losses on their schedule. 2. And I think I can excuse. They lost to an Oklahoma team they got blown out who was 6-6, and a Vanderbilt team who was not good either. So the Bama stuff, it is what it is at this point because they did it to themselves. I understand Ohio State lost to Michigan, but Notre Dame's ahead of Penn State. They lost to Northern Illinois, right?
Yeah, Notre Dame's strength of schedule is 59th in the nation. You guys want to talk about how they beat Army and Navy? They didn't beat anybody. In fact, they beat the best win on their schedule was the same Louisville team that Guest didn't want to give SMU any credit for beating this season.
I guess our difference is when we come to the playoffs, I want the higher ranked teams are the teams that have shown the ability to beat other big dogs. And I'm able to excuse one bad loss because sometimes that'll happen. And Ohio State has proven by beating 2 teams in the playoffs that they have the ability to knock off one of these higher ranked teams. And Penn State hasn't won a big game in a decade. Let's be real.
But that goes beyond Penn State, that argument, because again, with 120 teams, you have 80 teams a year that just don't have the opportunity to play against those big dogs and prove that they can beat them. This is why we have a playoff to begin with, because teams, who was it the one year, UCF, that went undefeated and didn't make it to the championship game because they played that schedule? Like we can't penalize these teams because they don't have the opportunity to play against the big dogs. And the Bama, who's the new Bama coach? He just said it this year. They have to relook at the way they rescheduled the non-conference games. So now they're really going to duck these middle of the pack teams that want a shot at the big dogs but can't get it.
And that's where, again, these automatic bids are going to have to come into play for these teams, and it's going to be tough, right? They have to win their conference. But unfortunately, that's kind of the way it is, and that's the way it is in kind of NCAA too. It's gotten a little bit better for the basketball tournament, but the big dogs are the big dogs, and they're going to get rewarded.
Yeah, and it all boils down to Cerise's point at the end that he made in the chat, which is that it's money. It's all money. Like they're going to make the decisions that bring in the most money.
That was the Florida State Alabama rationale last year too. I mean, if you look at conspiracy theories with some of that, Alabama, ESPN, SEC Network, all that stuff. A lot of eyeballs there. And yeah, sure, you can make the argument about Florida State's quarterback, but the reality is that the SEC and Alabama and ESPN have been in bed together for a while. And so you'd think that has to factor in the decision-making. Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, it's never fun being on those committees to put that stuff together because it's going to get nitpicked 8 ways to Sunday. And at the end of the day, you have to win 4 football games. So we're going to see what happens. You got to get hot at the right time and put it together. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's imperfect, right? You're trying to make a perfect solution to an imperfect sport, and it's just not run well. It sucks. I hate college football, guys.
Would you agree though? Would you agree that the bye situation needs to be corrected at this point?
Again, I'm on record as saying I didn't like the move to a 12-team playoff to begin with. So, I mean, I'm out on the 12-team playoff. Sure, it's great. Penn State made it, whatever. That's fun. But, we probably would have been a top 4 seed anyway.
No, you wouldn't have. You wouldn't have.
How? We wouldn't have been over who? Boise and SMU?
Well, I mean, Texas is 5, Notre Dame is 6. They would have been the two teams in with Georgia and Oregon.
What? We're 6.
No, you're 7, aren't you?
No, dude.
You're above Notre Dame?
Yes.
Okay, then you're right. My bad. I had it flip-flopped.
Yeah.
Neutral field, Texas is probably a 6-point favorite over Penn State in that approximate range.
Ohio State's a favorite over Penn State on a neutral field.
Agreed.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But I also don't disagree. I know we're talking in circles. Alabama's a favorite over half the teams in the playoffs.
True.
You just can't base it off of that. That's the problem. Because also, you know what? Ole Miss is probably a favorite. South Carolina is probably a favorite. Florida might even be a favorite over SMU.
But for teams with comparable resumes, I think you can weigh that into the equation. Again, when we have the Bama with the 3 losses that we can't get in, or the other SEC teams with 3 losses, they're out at that point. And then we have to compare who's in.
From you guys, because this is the crux of the argument that Guest and I had. Would you rather this be the SEC Invitational, where these SEC teams get in just because they play the harder teams and they win the better games? Or would you rather see SMU get in and Indiana get in and reward these, quote, smaller schools for having these great seasons? What would you rather see?
Go ahead, Marco.
I agree with you, Al. I see where you're heading with it. Probably the latter. Give these schools a chance to prove they belong. But it's similar to the James Franklin argument. You got to win one to actually get respect on this. And, if Indiana, who's been a much maligned team throughout the year, they've got to spring an upset if they want to be taken seriously in the long run.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Al. Because here's the counter argument. I know basketball is a different sport than football, but how many years have we gone into the NCAA tournament and we've given the old Big East gets 12 teams in, and the first weekend 8 of them are out.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it's, oh, maybe this conference wasn't that good, and we just assumed they were good because they're always good. So we can't just assume that the SEC has the best teams every year, even though traditionally they do, because every year is different. And if we just invite the SEC teams to invite them, we're not playing the way it should be. You need to be rewarded on your resume and your wins and losses and who you beat and who you lost to that given year.
Yeah.
In 10 years, it's going to be a 32-team playoff anyway, probably. So we'll be looking at March Madness style.
Money talks.
They'll find a way to do it. Yeah. Do you guys have a prediction? Do you guys for who's going to win it all?
I haven't followed college football enough to give a true prediction. Not Penn State, I'll tell you that.
You're not going out on a limb there, Seltzer.
But you had a free ride to the Final Four.
I'd probably go Oregon if I absolutely had to pick, but it could be an interesting one because there aren't any stud teams. Georgia's quarterback just got hurt, although their backup is probably just as good, if not better. Georgia, you'd think from a talent perspective. But again, Oregon is in that same boat of they had Chip Kelly, Mariota, all these guys, high rankings for many years, but they never really won the big one. So this could be their year.
I thought the Penn State quarterback played well in the championship game. He impressed me a little bit for as much as I've been down on him. And Oregon looked really good too, man. They looked fast, experienced. They got the quarterback who's been around for a while. They're definitely the team to beat.
Yeah, Oregon's really fast. They'd be my pick.
But speaking of money talks, guys, the final topic tonight, Juan Soto to the Mets, 15 years, $765 million. My son Hayden will be getting ready for college by the time the contract expires, which is a crazy thing to think about. The Yankees are left at the altar, and the Phillies are in a little bit of trouble here, guys. I want to get your initial thoughts to the deal and how much of an issue you think this is going to be for the Phillies coming up. Marco, what do you think?
Huge issue. I mean, if you look at the betting odds, 3 of the top 6 World Series favorites reside in the NL East. And not a great sign considering the Braves are going to get Strider back next year, Acuna. They've got a lot of power pieces in that lineup. They're going to do something else with the pitching. The Phils are getting older. So I think it's a huge concern. The Yankees, if they got Soto, that was going to be their big offseason win. The Mets and their owner, who's willing to spend whatever it takes, he's still going to go after Corbin Burns and try to re-sign Alonso. So it's not a great sign for the Phils. I think their window is rapidly closing. 2 years tops.
Al?
Not as concerned. Think about what the reaction was from Mets fans when we signed Bryce Harper. It was probably very similar. But the landscape is different. And to me, the fact that you now have 3 wild card teams that make the playoffs every year, and the Phillies have done their most damage from that wild card spot, I think is the main piece as to why I'm not that concerned. We don't have to win the East, and we don't have to be the next best team. We can be the second best team or the third best team and still make our way into the dance. So I'm not as concerned. And at the end of the day, and Seltzer, you've said this about Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, it's the Mets. And as great and as generational of a talent as Juan Soto is, they're going to find a way to met this up. Maybe not next season, maybe not the season after that, but I guarantee it's going to happen.
From a micro sense, as far as the move, I'm not overly concerned as well. Baseball is a sport to me that one man doesn't make that much of a difference compared to some of the other sports. The bigger issue, guys, here is, and Marco, you mentioned it, is Steve Cohen. And the fact now that the Phillies are competing for a World Series title, and there's not one, but 2 teams in the National League that just seem to be throwing money at whatever they want, and that's the Dodgers and the Mets. That is a huge hurdle to climb when you have, again, the Dodgers just adding on Blake Snell on top of an Ohtani contract from last year, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman. They're loaded. And now you have the Mets, who they still have holes to fill, and we'll see what they do. But Steve Cohen has absolutely shown that he's willing to spend. And we're going to need to see a little bit more from John Middleton, because the Phillies didn't make really many changes last year going into this season. This year they've kind of sat. We've heard a lot of rumors come up, but nothing's gotten done, especially after the way they went out last year. I'm concerned about these other teams and their willingness to spend money in the National League. And, Mark, you mentioned the Braves, who are not going to be spending money, but they have a lot of young talent that's locked up for a considerable amount of time, and they're going to be good for a while, even though they lost Max Fried earlier today. Here's the one question I have, guys. And I understand guaranteed money is guaranteed money, but why are these guys signing these 15, 16-year contracts? You look at Bryce Harper, right? He signed with us. This is year 7 coming up. 13 years, $330 million. If Bryce would have taken a 6-year deal, he probably gets $220 million, becomes a free agent this year, and probably gets $400 more. I just don't understand. The money that Bryce Harper is making annually is already completely underpaid compared to what he would get if he was in the market again today. I just don't understand. And the same thing will happen with Soto. He's getting $50 million. By the time this is in year 8, $50 million is not going to be that much for a player.
Yeah. I guess it's just the insurance bet, right? You're betting against, or you're taking the insurance against a potential injury. That's all I can think of, because you're right. Why wouldn't you just sign a short-term contract when in 5 years everything's going to be different, and that $700 million contract could potentially be a $900 million contract?
Well, a guy like Soto does have some red flags. I mean, they're not as notable as some other players, but he's not a great base runner. He's only 26 years old, not a great fielder. Like, these are things that are concerning if you're 33. At 26, you should be a little bit better than he is in that regard, but he can DH for the next 15 years. Look at a guy like Nelson Cruz, who was hitting 40 homers a year at age 41. There's no reason that can't be Soto. And quite frankly, I mean, you see it more in other sports like the NBA, but if Soto gets unhappy, he can figure out a way to talk himself out of town. Like, you don't have to do the whole James Harden shutdown thing, but the leverage is always with the players. And if the Mets flounder for a couple of years, I'm sure he can figure out a way to get traded, do something with the contract, restructure it.
See, you guys, I know you follow baseball more closely than I do. Marco is an avid fantasy baseball player, Adam. Is it wildly overpaying? And I get that money doesn't really exist in baseball, but to pay a guy who they've said is potentially going to be a DH within the next 3 seasons?
It would have been years ago, I'd say, but the game has changed. And even with the Ohtani stuff, the amount of merchandise that they'll sell will make that contract 100% worth it. It already is when you look at the Soto numbers and deferring all those deals. So it's counterintuitive to, I think, how we all grew up with sports, but it's logical this day and age.
I'm curious to see with the Ohtani situation whether or not he ends up pitching again. Because when he signed that contract, the thought was he was a two-way player. And I agree, Al. I think that, when you sign a guy to that type of contract, you're expecting, some value and some other stuff other than hitting. And Marcus said he's not going to give you anything on the bases. He's not going to give you anything defensively. From what I was reading, he seems pretty adamant about wanting to play the field, at least initially. So who knows how long that'll last. And I'm curious, and there have been absolutely reasons outside of his control. He's 26 years old. This is already his 4th team. Right. So, and again, Washington knew they weren't going to pay him. San Diego knew they weren't going to pay him, and they left the Yankees. So there's reasons behind it. But you always, again, it's just another little red flag that's out there, for this guy. And the fact that he left the Yankees for the Mets for what seems to be $5 million, that has red flags on it as well.
He's the first guy I've ever heard say they don't like playing on the West Coast. Said he didn't like being in San Diego. What's not to like about the weather? He had protection in the lineup with Machado and Tatis. So agreed, Adam. There's something there that doesn't quite meet the eye.
Do you think maybe it's just the complacent vibe out there that he doesn't like? He wants to actually play for something. Because I tell you what,
the anti-Mike Trout.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, the Philly fans are going to give him something to play for, because I can't. Dude, it's going to be fun as hell booing him. That place is going to get loud in the first pressure situation that he steps up to the plate.
Yeah, I mean, this guy has consistently been. He won a World Series in Washington. He got to an NLCS with San Diego against the Phillies, and he went to the World Series last year. So he's been consistently with winning teams and in that environment. Maybe he just likes the way being at Yankee Stadium in a playoff game, being in Washington in a playoff game. It's probably different than San Diego.
Was he 19 when he got called up?
Yeah.
That's insane, dude. He was
Next
grabbing
year.
his crotch like that at 19. Yeah, he had the audacity to do that.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens next year. Vladdy Guerrero Jr., he's going to be the big fish. He'll be 27, I believe. So he's probably licking his chops after that contract that Soto just signed.
Well, I mean, you talk about the young talent of the Braves. What about the Phillies? I don't want to get too far off, down the rabbit hole here. But I know we got a few guys in the farm system. Aiden Miller, Andrew Painter, obviously. Justin Crawford. Like, are these guys coming up anytime soon? Liam Castellanos just hit his first home run. Nick put it up online?
I think they're expecting Painter this year at some point. The problem is he's going to be on an innings limit, so who knows what that's going to entail come playoff time, assuming we get there. I think the thought is Justin Crawford could potentially be up this year. I think it would take a big year for Aiden Miller to be here this year, but I think assuming everything goes right, he starts on the team in 26 would be my guess. Marco, you think anything other than that?
I think that's logical. I mean, I'd say you don't rush them to the show. You've got enough guys. Give them a little bit of seasoning if you need to. One of the key signings, I don't know if you guys saw it yesterday, Jordan Romano coming to the Phils. I'm a big fan of him. He had some injuries, rough year with Toronto, but he's got a really good track record here. And I think that's the type of signing under the radar that maybe allows you to keep some of your young arm talent in the minors a little bit longer until you actually need them.
Here's my concern about that. And again, some of it's just posturing, and I don't want to get too deep into the Phillies roster situation. But Dombrowski said that they now have 4 leverage relievers. And the 4 guys he's referring to is Jordan Romano coming off elbow surgery, Jose Alvarado, who couldn't pitch in a pressure situation at the end of last year, Orion Kirkring, who has looked bad in both postseasons he's pitched in, and Matt Strahm, who is more guts than stuff, if you ask me. So I'm concerned if they go into the season with that as their 4 guys in the bullpen. That's for sure.
I think they're going to make a move, whether it's early on in the offseason or a little bit later. They have to bolster that bullpen a little bit.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Here's the real question. Oh, go ahead, Marco.
I was just saying, bullpen arms are such a crapshoot year to year too. With Alvarado a couple years back and Sir Anthony. I mean, you think of it as almost a roll of the dice with these guys, and if 60% of your bullpen performs up to snuff, you're kind of okay with that, and you just kind of jettison the other guys to the side if you need to.
Yeah,
that's
true.
That's true.
So here's the question I have for you. We're all fathers of sons. I have a son. Adam has a son. Marco just welcomed his second son. He has 3. Now he joined the family of 5 brigade here.
Wait. You just said he just welcomed his second son. He has 3.
It's a daughter. So it's a girl and 2
boys.
Okay.
I have 3 kids. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do we need to get our sons playing baseball like immediately?
With their right hand tied behind their back.
Yeah. Lefty.
He's a lefty, dude.
The loogies are no longer lefty 1 out guys. You got to face 3 now.
Yeah. Listen, that's where the money is.
Right?
That's where the money is.
Jeff Samardzija.
Yeah.
NFL wide receiver or mediocre 4.75 ERA for a decade.
Yeah.
Logging 200 innings and cashing checks. All right, we got one last thing to do tonight before we wrap, and that's best bets. Al, we both took L's
I didn't warn Marco about this.
That's all right, okay. Marco. We're gonna delay it. You need to look through the point spreads and give a best bet. So we'll let you go last. Al, we both took L's last week. I don't know which one was worse, you backing Penn State or me backing the Chicago Bears. So we'll start with you if you're ready. And let's
I got one.
Track.
I'm going to stop playing games here. It's week 15 of the NFL season. Vegas is so much sharper than Joe Public at this point. And so I'm going to take the game. I've been saying this for weeks now where I've been saying, oh, there's a game that like it's so fishy. And then I don't take it. This week, to me, the biggest line on the board that looks like what the hell is going on here is the Packers laying 3 at Seattle on Sunday night. I think Seattle's a very good football team, and I don't know how they're getting points at home Sunday night in front of that 12th man crowd. The Packers are very good, but boy, that's a tough spot to lay 3. So I'm laying the 3. Give me the Packers -3 in Seattle.
All right. I'm going to go to the AFC South. Chris mentioned last week that he thought the Houston Texans were a Super Bowl sleeper. Well, to me, I think they've underachieved for most of the year, but I think they're coming off a bye. I do like D'Amico Ryans, and I think it's time for them to put their foot on the gas and get ready for the playoffs. The Miami Dolphins, even though they got the win last week against the Jets, they looked like they were ready to play the string out, and the Jets just looked like they were willing to give a game away even more. Give me the Texans at home, just laying the field goal. I want to believe in the Texans, and I think this is the week that they put it together and they win by about 10 against the Miami Dolphins.
I'd probably go for the Thursday night game at this point. The Niners giving 2.5 to the Rams. The Rams coming off an ultra emotional big win over the Bills. It feels like short week, not much preparation. This is the Niners season. They're 6-7 already, so they've got a very, very low likelihood of the playoffs. But at this point, Brock Purdy's back. They haven't gotten the ball to Debo, and he's doing a little bit of the wide receiver diva stuff. No, they don't have McCaffrey, but they've got a pretty good stable of running backs. This is their season on the line, and for the Rams, this is important, but they really kind of gave it all the emotion last week. So classic letdown spot.
I like that. All right, so we got the 49ers, the Texans, and the Seahawks are the picks this week. I want to thank you guys all again who have joined us in the chat. We'll be retiring it tonight, but for one last time, we're going to drop that beat.